Hello, everybody. I am Professor Timothy Gleason, Director of Interactive Web Management, known as IWM. This is a major offered by the College of Business and the College of Letters and Science at the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. IWM is where technology creation and content creation meet. And thanks to the Departments of Computer Science, Information Systems, Journalism, and Marketing. Every semester, the program brings together past and present students, employers, and faculty to discuss issues in the field. Later in our meeting, graduating student Sydney Ott will present her capstone project. But first, we will hear about aspects of neurodiversity and employment, and we are happy to have a local specialist to teach us more about this subject. After this presentation, feel free to enter questions in the chat, so we may address them during the Q&A portion that will follow. On that note, thank you for coming today to listen to our guest speaker, Bryan Mischler of the Trefort Center in Fond du Lac. Bryan's presentation is about preparing exceptional minds for exceptional careers. I will now hand this over to Bryan.
Let's see if this loads. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me today. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, neurodiversity, and especially the connection between that and technology and business, which we'll kind of talk about how those intersect. So I work at the Trefort Center, and the Trefort Center is really focusing on the concepts and ideas of multiple intelligence with people that may have a disorder. Typically, the disorders fall into the areas of autism. That's kind of our overall reaching specialty, but also in the areas of ADHD, could be brain injuries, dyslexia, and other types of disorders that really, if we take a deeper look at some of those characteristics that are actually part of the diagnostic process for giving somebody the diagnosis of one of these disorders, really some of these characteristics can be viewed as strengths. And enhancing those strengths can really give people great opportunities in the areas of careers. Let's see. So you're seeing all of my things. We'll just go through. Is this okay? So today I'll kind of be looking at autism and the shift of perspective. What we're finding with autism is that really, instead of looking at it as a disability, if we looked at it as a unique operating system, that many people on the autism spectrum have absolutely amazing talents and gifts that, if they're fostered, could lead to the development of high quality careers. So here's just kind of an idea of the autism spectrum, and some of the confusion is that we often apply like IQs to people with autism spectrum, and although IQ is not a good marker for looking at intelligence, and the spectrum of autism is so vast and wide that it's hard to get a good understanding of what exactly autism is. But if we look at some of those characteristics of autism, we see that things like being dedicated to routine and the likelihood that they'll have a very high interest area that they become experts in, and those types of characteristics can be used to develop the skills that they might be lacking in social areas and vocational skills as well. So Dr. Trefort is the kind of the founder of the Trefort Center. If people aren't familiar with who he is, he's kind of the world's leading expert on savant syndrome. And essentially that means they have somebody either with a brain injury or some other diagnosis has like genius level ability in some area. You can kind of see his quotes here. But the most important part is kind of the last part where it says equally important to recommend pertinent evidence-based intervention strategies focusing on the ability rather than the disability, because this is where we'll find that these people excel. So autism specifically is a pattern of over and underconnected areas of the brain. And we can see here that they take in way more sensory information and they process it in more areas of the brain. So the picture on the left is the brain of somebody with autism. The picture on the right is what we would consider as well somebody that doesn't have autism. Often the term neurotypical is used. And this really, the brain of an autistic person can give them more information and process it in more areas of the brain, which often gives them a unique perspective or an ability that other people don't have. So we utilize the Trevor approach to try to find these strengths, to leverage them against the deficits. So we really focus on the strengths to build those up. And what we see is as you build up strengths, you see oftentimes deficits disappear. And so at the Trevor approach, we start with an accurate assessment. And we do assessment with like psychologists, psychiatrists. We look at vocational skills for our older people. We'll look at cognitive ability in our younger people, OT, speech. And then the Trevor approach is really strength-based. If we can find those areas of genius and use those to create like an environment or a curriculum that's specifically based for the individual to help them strengthen, even though they have those strengths and sometimes they're always already at a very high ability, they can still be developed further. Another aspect of the Trevor approach is natural environment. We want to create an environment that's as close to the environment that the person will have to function in as we can get it. Oftentimes with people with neurodiversity, they have a hard time generalizing. So if we just talk about, let's say, if we just talk about what it's like to go to a bank and get a checking account, they might have a hard time actually going into the bank and doing that and carrying the information that we had talked about into that environment. So we might do something like set up time at a bank and we'll actually take our clients there and have them sit through the process and see what it's like so that when they go, they're more likely to be able to function in that environment. Another important part of the Trevor Center is nurturing relationships. So we really want to develop a relationship. And this is important in the vocational world too, because you'll have people on your team that are neurodiverse. At this point, if you're counting ADHD, anxiety and depression, trauma, dyslexia, learning disabilities, autism, probably the majority of your teams in the workplace you're going to have people with kind of neurodiverse brains that need different ways of looking at the goals and the work that you have for these people. And in leadership positions, you're going to need to be able to leverage this understanding that different people need different things to be successful in the workplace. Another big part of the Trevor approach is sensory awareness. So everybody has a unique sensory system, and this is how we view our world. And it's important to have an understanding of that so that we can give people breaks that are rejuvenating to keep the workplace in a functional and ever evolving place of employment. And then the final thing is systems, and this is one of the areas of systems, changing systems understanding. So me doing these presentations, we do a lot of work. We did presentations at J.J. Keller and Secura and talked, especially in the tech fields, because of the need for people that they have and the fact that people from these neurodiverse populations tend to be very good in tech fields. So bringing in technology to help as a base for developing skills is something that we really focus on and that we take pride in at the Trevor Center. Accurate assessment. So this is another, we're going to kind of get into these a little bit deeper, but we assess the person, the family, the environment that the person's in. If they're in school, we do school assessments, and then anybody who may know them. So their teachers, their family members, their friends. We focus on strength-based. You can kind of see here, if we look at the strengths, if you focus on the deficits of somebody that has a neurological disorder, the likelihood that you're going to make progress within the areas of the brain that struggle are very minimal. But if you leverage those strengths, it seems like there's no higher end, and you can just keep on pushing that and pushing that. And what you see is, like I said earlier, the higher their strengths get and the better and more profound and more robust those areas of the brain become, the less and less we see those deficits are a problem. Every child, it seems like, if you're working with kids, is an expert in something. And really the difference is that we look at, if you want to learn about space or dinosaurs, we often talk, our 5-year-olds are the biggest experts. But we often say, well, put that interest on hold. And if you still have that interest when you're 20 years old, and that's still your passion, then you can kind of pick it up when you get into college and focus on those. But we often go, well, what if we started developing these passions that kids have at a very early age and focus on them throughout their college career or throughout their entire school life? So again, natural environments, hands-on activities. If we're looking at a good example is we had a young gentleman who at the age of 8, he had just this genius ability to understand computers and computer systems. But unfortunately, at the age of 8, you don't really understand the grand scheme of the importance of security and things like that. So at 8 years old, this kid was able to hack into some, I forget where he hacked into, but he got the attention of the FBI. So they kind of started watching him at a very early age. And of course, when they show up and find out that the person that hacked into their system was an 8-year-old autistic child, they had a lot of questions about what was going on there. So he did a little bit get like some sponsorship and some mentorship from the FBI. Now at the age of 12, he decided that he thought it would be great if the school's computer system, the online website, was available to turn in your homework. Now that seems pretty normal, and we have Google Classroom that allows us to do that. But this was, I think he's 23 now, so when he was 12, we're looking at like 11, 12 years ago. So he ends up hacking into the school computers and developing this system where everybody can turn their homework in, and nobody knew what was going on until a teacher went into the office and says, hey, I see that somebody said that you can turn your homework in online. That's like great. And the school officials, the principal and everybody was like, what are you talking about? And they go in there and they try to look in the security thing, and they go back into the history and they can't find that anybody's been in there. But the only reason that this kid got caught was he was the only one that had turned in homework. So again, he kind of gets in trouble, but that experience for him really led into several different things. They started having him participate in these contests where kids could, not kids, but like companies, when their code is not working, they put out these competitions. If you can find out what's wrong with the code, they give you like scholarship money. By the time this kid graduated from high school, he had $240,000 in scholarships from doing these things. And he could go through the lines and just like rattle it off and be like, line number, 9,786, the G and the H are switched around. And he could just mine through this data in a way that nobody else was capable of doing. And the interesting thing is that he figured out how to hack into the school. There was something, and I know very little about computers, so if I'm like not saying this right, this is my understanding of what happened. The clock on the thing could be accessed, and instead of, what he did was he went like 300, 400 years in the future where the time was set up the same dates. And he was able to get into the system through the thing. And when he got out, he reset the time back to modern time. So when they went into the history, they didn't see that anybody was in there. What they had to do was look 200 years into the future. And that level of thinking for a 12-year-old And this is a kid that may not even, if he went to a job interview, he may not even be able to make it through a job interview, but his computer skills are phenomenal. He ended up going to a school, and I was in contact with his professors, and his professors told me, we're not teaching him anything. All we're doing is recording what he's capable of doing. And I see kids like that in the areas of math and science, art, music, and then a wide variety of things that I'd call, like, we call them high interest areas, and that can be really anything. Nurturing relationships, this is very important in the job fields and for human resources. And, you know, when you talk about marketing, many people on the autism spectrum are very proficient in the areas of streaming and YouTube and program development. And use of technology tends to be something that they're exceptionally good at. So understanding that these populations that we may not have looked at in the past for job careers and development opportunities really are populations that we need to start looking at to kind of further and grow many of these business opportunities. Sensory awareness, you know, another thing about tech fields is, and maybe it's because of the number of individuals that are neurodiverse that tend to get into technology, the companies that have really been pushing this idea are companies like Apple and Google. Microsoft has an autism hiring program, and they are providing rooms and little pods where people can do their work in areas that are not your typical little cubicle with fluorescent lights. And it really seems we're actually kind of taking the lead from them and these areas that they have set up for individuals to kind of regroup. And many people on the spectrum really talk about how their sensory system is kind of what regulates their ability to perform on a day-to-day basis. So systems, again, you know, looking at the systems that you have and how accessible are you, and are there possible you know, unintended consequences of not being able to have people participate at a level that they might be able to if you made a few small adjustments. And another aspect is building community, looking at mentorship programs, and that kind of goes back to natural environment situations, is that pairing a lot of people, how can I phrase this? Pairing people with neurodiversities with a mentor that's already in the field so that they can come to those workplaces and see how the work is done really seems to be a huge benefit for people on the autism spectrum. And people with ADHD, if they can do the hands-on aspects of learning rather than just reading about it, because sometimes they have a hard time taking what's read and go, okay, this is what really this looks like in the actual field when I'm doing the work. So when you're taking that Trevor approach, although we work with kids as young as kindergarten, and we have a school that goes all the way at this point through high school, and we're currently working with some of the UW systems at the technical college level to provide some changes that will make it the school environment and even the expectations of classes and stuff give them a greater likelihood for success in the college years. You can kind of see, you know, focusing on accurate assessments. Sometimes you have to go beyond, you know, the standard tests and look at those individual skills that a person might have. Strength-based, so I've had many of my clients kind of go through a college experience, and the biggest roadblock that we have in the college experience is, you know, they might be experts in, you know, chemistry, but they can't get past, and I always use this as an example. I had this class, and I went to UWO, Native American, 18th century Native American women's literature. I love that class, but I'm a very a social person, and I can kind of look at that situation and go, okay, how is some of that stuff still relevant to today? But sometimes kids on the autism spectrum, and maybe even with ADHD, if that's not their key thing that they focus on, they really struggle with classes like that. So they can't. So essentially what happens is that we tell them, well, you can't move on to this career in mathematics or this career in chemistry because you can't pass this kind of unrelated classwork. And that becomes their barrier, because many schools, there's not like advanced chemical, industrial careers and jobs that you can get without getting that college education first. Natural environments, college is also a great place because it's like a microcosm of a city. You have your little mini grocery stores, your restaurants. There's plenty of organized social activities that really kind of mimic a city on a bigger scale. So many of our clients have really had success as having that college opportunity to kind of bridge between your high school careers and then a life of independence. Relationship focus, that's important in college too, because at UWO, it's kind of a mid-range school. It's not too big, it's not too small. It's kind of the perfect environment. But if you don't know where to go and who to ask and who to talk to if you're having a struggle, that can really be another roadblock. So developing those relationships with these neurodiverse populations, because when they struggle, their ability to ask for help goes down. So there does need to be some kind of oversight outside of the individual themselves. And again, sensory awareness, schools are starting to put in more sensory rooms and sensory break areas to make that transition. School can be stressful at times, and having these areas to decompress is important. And then systems, changing these ideas of what schools, think of as, and more schools are doing that. I see the big sign as the entrepreneurial aspect of what UW Oshkosh is offering. So it's not just your specific major, but you can start cherry picking from the different majors and create kind of your own major. So why is this important that we do this? Well, it benefits both the community that we're talking about and the workplace overall. As you can see here, here's some stats. 90% of people on the autism spectrum are either underemployed or unemployed. 50,000 people with autism enter adulthood every year, and only 1/3 enter college, and fewer than 20% after 4 years. So 20% of the 1/3 of the 50,000 people will graduate within 5 years. Technology, media, and telecommunications fields will be short by 1.1 million skilled workers. So these are fields that need more people than are coming out of the school system to provide those jobs. And besides those jobs that they need, there's over the next 5 years, there's going to be an increase in 68% of those skilled labor areas. And across the board, we're struggling to find employees in every job situation. So looking at populations that typically weren't looked at before is a major area. Here is how we kind of so we kind of set up what we call the creative media group. And this is a way for people specifically on the autism spectrum, but we had a group, and there was a group of kids that were, amazing writers and amazing artists. And we have a group of kids that can listen to a song one time and play it on their instrument of choice. We also have people who are interested in audio video editing and YouTube channels. And so we kind of looked at this and said, well, it's kind of like a mini production studio. And so we had this idea because they could use their high interest, their gifts that they're actually absolutely amazing at, and pair with other people and start using those vocational skills like executive functioning and emotional regulation, and working, as a team and a group to be able to produce some sort of shared experience or work project. Let's see if this will play here.
So I've got my essay written, and I've been working on it for about a week. So now I'm going to show you how I use Grammarly to edit.
Just to let you know, Brian, we could hear the video. We weren't able to see it. So you may have to give us a short description of what you could see.
I seem to have lost. Well, that's too bad. We're very proud of that video. So our kids put together kind of a clip of everything that they've done. So they do camera work, they do audio, video work. They provide some. They create learning content. So we do a little show that we just finished the first episode of with puppets. We have a Dr. Trevor puppet, so it's kind of like Sesame Street. So they teach like counting and moving to music and things where the kids, well, and I say kids, but they're between the ages of 13 and 22, and we started out with 6 people, and I think we're up to between 25 and 30 right now. And they do a wide variety of creative media type things, and they do some of the media like creating videos for the SSM Health YouTube, Facebook page, all that kind of telemarketing type stuff. And it's not only teaching vocational skills, but it's like kind of clinical therapy. So we work on their therapy goals, increase social skills, and it was the video was a presentation that they had all put together. So here are some, leadership development, redefining leadership. Many of these kids, when your disability is the primary focus all the time, you start thinking only of yourself through that disability, and they don't think of themselves as often as leaders. But when you teach to the talent and you develop that self-esteem that comes along with being able to show your strengths, you really see them starting to take lead roles. They're happy to show people and teach other people what they've learned. Here are the areas from the video that I just showed. A couple of so they do the directing, they do the writing, they'll do, what do you call them? They're like storyboards of how everything's going to be carried out. Skip a couple of these. So learning to navigate those skills in the workplace is another thing we work on. Sometimes people get anxious when their ideas aren't being used, or if they disagree with something. How do we work through those things in a way that is beneficial for everybody? Here's some artwork that some of our kids have done. Having some loading issues here. This one on the left was, this is the 4th drawing that this kid had ever done. And if you magnify it, you can actually see the reflection. So he draws these pictures from a photograph. You can see the reflection of the person that takes the photo. So where do we go from here? It's really, the reason why we put out this information and why we've kind of come together at the Trevert Center to provide these opportunities is that, there's brilliance and intelligence in areas that previously and historically occur in a population that nobody has really given credit or opportunity or experiences for. And that's probably the most important thing, because all of our communities are better when everybody gets to participate and share, their experiences and their strengths. And that is the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you very much. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll go into the question and answer portion of our discussion. And so I'd like anyone with a question to just post it in the chat. So look for that text bubble, and you can type in your question and see about responding to it. So our first question is, how can you advise team members to work with neurodiverse members?
Well, I think that the first step is just being aware that there are neurodiverse people, and there's a big kind of debate on whether or not people should tell if they have a disability or some challenges. Some people feel like they'd be taken advantage of, and other people, well, it's been my experience that those people that do disclose have a better working relationship with the people around them. But you don't necessarily need to know. If you see that somebody's struggling in an area, to understand a person at an individual level. We say that in all forms of diversity. If you don't know, ask. That's the best way. If you notice that somebody's struggling in a particular area, you don't need to know that they have a diagnosis to be able to provide help, assistance, or support. Those are probably the most, understanding ways to go about doing that. But if you do know, then looking into that, talking to the individual, what helps you? How often do you need breaks? What time of day works better for you to do what it is that we need to do?
And another question is, what can colleges do to be more welcoming to this population?
Well, first, I should say that there's probably there's already people of all these diversities already in your classrooms. I'm sure that you have, at this point, it wasn't that long ago, a year or two, we were saying neurodiverse and neurotypical, and now we're kind of going, well, I think everybody's just neurodiverse. Everybody's got something going on. Everybody has a particular learning style that they work best with. Schools, I think, do a good job, but it tends to be some of the rules that get in the way. So advocating for people who need things like, one of the rules that we're looking at right now is that most of your classes, like in order to be accredited as a college, have to be contained within that like 8 to 16 week time period. And essentially we're saying, well, you learn a skill in 8 to 16 weeks, and if you don't learn it within that time frame, you don't learn it. And that's probably a bigger battle that we have to go through, but just things like providing sensory areas, providing opportunities for those people who do come to school to have those social opportunities, because often they won't take those opportunities or feel so anxious about those opportunities, to they won't initiate those opportunities for themselves. And there's lots of schools now, UW Milwaukee, I think UW Marquette, they're starting to put more autism programs. They're again, the entrepreneurship, we've used that kind of framework because you can start picking the classes out of different categories to develop your own major, has been very helpful for many of these people that just, they might really struggle in math, but they might be brilliant in English. So how do we, focus on the strengths of these things and not get hung up on possibly an area of academics that they might not need or use in their particular field?
And we have a question. What was one of the most challenging jobs or projects that you have done at your work there at Ignatian?
I can say with the group that I work with, because I've been working with these kids for so long, like leading up to a project, I'm always so anxious and so nervous that because I see how great they are on a day-to-day basis and how wonderful their skills are, but sometimes just the anxiety takes over and they can't perform. And so often they've performed, and done talks at the state autism conference. They've done talks at many major companies and corporations. And leading up, that sometimes we're practicing things and they're struggling, or they're having a hard time paying attention, and I get so nervous. But every time that they have to actually do the thing, they always hit it out of the park. And it's always such an uplifting experience for me to participate with these young men and women. So I would say when it comes to like where the downside is, it's usually on my part. They got their stuff handled. I'm the one that has to pay more attention and work harder to get that stuff across.
And how does this mentorship work? Is it one-on-one, or is it different kind of structure?
So it can happen in a variety of ways. Like currently we have a lot of gentlemen who are interested in animation. Sometimes their high interest is so specific that what has helped often is to find a retired person in that career that's looking for some sort of, they tend to be the most, they have the most time and most interested in kind of giving back. So it can be a one-to-one situation. But often we will go to like community colleges. There are some math genius kids, and I'm not a math genius. There are some, kids that play Beethoven for the first time, and I'm like, wow, this is really good, but I'm not really musically inclined. I don't know how good this is. So we do often go to colleges and tech colleges, depending upon the thing, and we have to go. Can one of the specialists in this field look at what this kid's doing and give us an idea of like what this kid's level of proficiency is, because he's so far above everybody else but the difference between my understanding of like computers and expert proficiency is so great. It's like, okay, I need help. And so like with the animation, we went to one of the UW schools, found a professor who was interested in animation, and he's giving little classes to like 6 different kids, so that mentorship can take a variety of looks. Do you think school or work has made issues relating to neurodiversity worse, or do you think people are more aware of these issues? Well, I would say that that's a good example. Like 50% of my population has really, really struggled with things when everything kind of went online. But 50% of the clients that I see the expression of, I heard this over and over again, I've been training for this my whole life. So it's hard to pick a thing and say, okay, this applies to everybody. That's kind of what makes it a spectrum. For every person that you'll see that really struggled with that isolation, there's another person that really excelled in those areas. Those kids that were already computer proficient and playing video games all the time and connecting with their friends online didn't really seem to struggle at all when they had to. And really, it's seeing how these kids adopted the technology that was already out there. And it's interesting to see how they all connected in all these areas. And then you see things like Zoom and Google Meeting start taking things from like the kids' video game online hubs that were offered, and Twitch, and what's the other one, Discord, and they started like incorporating those aspects into the stuff that we now use for business.
Another question is, what advice do you have for supporting students through the job search process, since it can be a struggle for some people to do a traditional style interview?
So that is kind of where we looked at that systems change, and one of the things that we talk about is, not waiting, putting so much weight on that interview, because that can be so anxious and nerve-wracking for particular people. I mean, I've had clients go in there and be so anxious that they could not answer their name. They're just so anxious. But if you would have sat them down in front of the computer and said, hey, this is the problem that we had done, they probably could have done it within the length of time of their interview. So finding more ways to, and we often talk about that interview process is so socially loaded. You don't really have any idea what the other person's actual ability within the context of the job is. You're essentially grading somebody's charisma and social engagement. A person who's very good at socializing and engaging with people will appear to be more proficient in the area that you're talking about than they might be. But so what I guess I'm saying is it's not an accurate description if you're not looking at work. So we often tell employers, if there's a way to, and many tech places do give you like mini projects. Here's a sample project to work on. Can you work through this? And that seems to have been more helpful for many of these people that really struggle with the interview process.
Is it possible for something like a university to contact that employer and make some suggestions, or is that out of bounds?
Oh, no. So that happens a lot, especially with these kids that have absolutely, and it does seem to be like the more amazing, like that kid that I was talking about, very low social skills, but there's something about his understanding of computer language that just is intuitive to him, and we struggle even from the science perspective, and we do research on these kids, is to be like, what exactly is going on here, because they seem to understand computer language in a way that almost mimics other people's ability to communicate through like speaking language or social language. So it's often the professor who knows somebody in a field that's related to what this kid's talent is that makes those connections. So that is definitely an area that I think has really benefited many of these kids that could make it through that process. I'm kind of trying to read that last one. In my experience, job interviews are very focused on your interpersonal skills. Right. That's kind of what I was saying, and I agree. Often, like I said, I think the interview process, and because I train these kids as to, okay, let's go through an interview process, and we have them go through the questions that are typically answered in the interview process. And often even the people that I work with that do the interviewing, there's this game that's kind of played through the interview process. The interviewer doesn't always want to do it, so they're looking up like the top 10 questions that are asked in an interview, and the interviewee is looking up the top 10 answers to the questions that are often in the interview, and it seems to be that at least you're testing, like, was this person accurate enough to look online to see what the answers are within the context of the interview. And and often it's not connected to the job itself. So finding those ways to actually see if the person's skills match the job that you're hiring for.
I wonder how much of it comes down to, in a sense, training the next generation of human resource specialists.
Absolutely.
To encourage them to think differently about the process.
And that is, when we go to J.J. Keller and stuff, we have, it seems like, silos. You have the people who are tech people that will immediately, and, like I said, the tech field tends to be a field that many people with neurodiversity go into. So they're already neurodiverse people who tend to be, excuse my language for lack of a better term, they're no BS people. I just want to see you do the work. And then we have the human resources people who are essentially responsible for managing these people, this next silo over. So, training those people to understand and to be able to communicate and to create an environment that's welcoming and low anxiety enough so that people will come in when they're struggling. That's I think that it's kind of it's almost a meme. Nobody wants to talk to the human resources about their struggles. But they're the people that are there to do that job. So it's almost like we try to stay away from the human resources people, but what we need to do is incorporate them more into understanding how to create more harmonious workplaces for everybody.
And we have a question about motivation and inspiration. And it seems especially applicable if someone does tend to be very narrow in their focus of interest. How do you motivate and inspire people to try something different or learn something different or go beyond that anxiety?
That's a kind of a tricky question because they tend to be intrinsically motivated for that narrow interest. And hopefully that narrow interest falls within the interest of what it is that you're trying to get them to do, especially in a workplace situation. And now the flip side of that is if you're not in one of those narrow and you're trying to get them to do something that's not necessarily within that skill set, we've had to have conversations with clients to be like, why do you really want to do this job? Because it seems like you don't really necessarily have any of the skills, and it's not a bad thing. But there are jobs, so sometimes we have to gear, people away from one job that they're kind of looking at and into another area to show them where their skills kind of fit, and why it might be a struggle from them. But at the same time, you don't want to hinder somebody that's looking into that area. First, we try to go, okay, how do we leverage the skills you already have into this new area? Is there a connection? Because it's oftentimes, I've in many situations with these individuals, because their level of understanding is so high in these areas, I'm not making the connection that they see within this new area. It seems obvious to me that that's not a good fit. But for them, sometimes they're making a connection that doesn't seem typical. And that's how we innovate all areas. You often see somebody come from another field into another field and go, oh, wait a minute, you guys are doing some things here, especially in technology. You guys are doing some things here that we were doing over here a little differently. And to adapt some of what you're doing would make this job way easier in this field that typically would not have been thought of to make those connections.
Part of the challenge is you brought up about that literature course that you enjoyed as a student. That may be an obstacle for other students is if we're unable to kind of change that educational system at least sooner to provide more flexibility, what are those motivators we could give a student to, I mean, let's just say it is, somewhere in the more broader general education, what motivation techniques are there to get those students through that so they're just not focused on their area of interest?
So it would, if there's a way to incorporate it into, so if you're doing, I'm trying to think how some of this, so I worked with an athletic savant that did go to school, and he was going to school for physical therapy, but he had to do something that was required in the music range. And he eventually made the connection on his own that Music was just timing and distance, the same as his athletic ability. And as soon as he made that connection, his ability to understand music and actually started playing instruments and all this kind of stuff. So if you have a math person, there's math and timing and stuff. If you can find a way to tie those two things together, if you need to, let's say, grade based on, well, you guys are kind of in the telemarketing, the marketing uh, stuff. So if you can find a person that's like um, an expert in a field, and then use that to create the marketing material type things, that's always the best connection to incorporate those two worlds. So there are just going to be times, like for our math kids that are trying to do this understanding of the social connection of English, where you have to kind of look at and go, do they really need this skill over here to do the job? And are we preventing them now from doing the job that they're supposed to be here getting an education for because of an unrelated area? Because sometimes the brain is just not going to work in those areas. So you try those other ways to kind of motivate, but you also, I think, as the outside and the professionals, we have to look at that and go, are we really testing and training this person for the skills that they need for a vocational, and that we're not stopping that? Because the number of math geniuses that I have sitting in their basement right now because they can't get through college courses, and that's the beginning point. Nobody gives anybody an upper level math job that hasn't graduated from a college scenario or situation. There's no other access to some of those higher functioning jobs. So then those kids that often they'll end up at Goodwill separating socks, or at the local many of the kids I've seen, they're at a cafeteria somewhere drying dishes, and they're Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory level brilliant mathematicians. So that needs to come from a variety of areas, motivating them, trying to make the connections to the things they already know, and then really looking at the system and going, is this, and I understand we want people to be well-rounded, but we also need people who are, who specify in particular areas, and we need to make sure that we're not both ways. We need multiple paths to these same career opportunities.
Well, I think we have a great concluding question over here with any suggestions on how to get more involved with this community, or where we can go to get more information.
Well, you can definitely check out, the trevortcenter.com to get more information. Some of the, if you're going to do some research online, some of the most recent, buzzwords are 2E and 2E educational, twice exceptional, that stands for. That typically means you have some high level of intellectual ability, but also tied with a diagnosed disability. Savant syndrome is another thing to kind of research. Those are the two primary areas. And then, within the careers, you'll find, people with dyslexia tend to be more likely to go into graphic designs because they have great visual spatial ability within the tech fields. Those people with ADHD tend to do really good in the tech fields when you're having to work on a different thing every day or multiple things throughout the day. Those are the people who are excelling, and sometimes they just find themselves, they gravitate towards those areas. So you'll find, and it's not necessarily the disability, it's the ADHD that they have that allows them to be able to jump proficiently from activity to activity to activity without feeling worn out or beat down. And then volunteer if you're interested in doing these things. We have kids that are interested in YouTube channels and streaming. And, often parents will come in and say, yeah, he wants to be a YouTuber, and, we're trying to get him away from that. Well, right now we have a whole department at SSM Health that handles YouTube channels and creating videos. And if you're a kid that started when you were, 8 years old, by the time you're entering that field, those are going to be real, job opportunities. We have, another whole department that just does social media. These are becoming real life jobs. And there's a kid out there that wants to be a YouTuber. So connecting that marketing, I mean, those are the things. It's the marketing department that figures out, oh, wait a minute, there's 1 billion people on Facebook. There's lots of people watching YouTube right now, and there's need for YouTube content. And there's kids out there that want to do that.
All right, terrific. Thank you for taking your time out today to talk to us about this.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on today.